My name is Mizan. I'm a campaigner and an events organizer and a camp guardian for the community camp for Palestine. I would like to thank everyone for coming to this event and for watching online. Now, this event is called Policing the Great Israel Real Estate Event. It focuses on the role of the police and how they behaved when it comes to policing the pro-Palestine protesters in Edgware on June the 14th. Now, I was there, many of you guys were there, and we saw the behavior of the police basically, and how really their behavior facilitated the illegal land sales in Edgware. Now, after the event, I got connected with Netpol, especially with Kevin, and I was made aware of this report, One Day in Edgware. Now, basically, Netpol are a police monitoring project. They monitor the role of the police when it comes to grassroots movements, and they document maybe kind of systems of oppression. And for the Edgware event, they came out with this report, One Day in Edgware, the policing of the protest against the Great Israeli Real Estate Event on 14th of June, 2026. Now, this report is a very, very important report. It highlights the testimonies of people that were there and the actions of the police. Now, what we want to do is one of the outcomes of these events is ideally we would like the police to respond to this report. As far as I'm aware, they haven't responded, have they? They haven't responded, but we do want the police to respond to this report. So everyone, if you can, grab a copy of the report, read it yourself. You can download it online as well, share it with your friends, and if somehow you can share it with the police, share it with the police as well. I'm one of the complainants, and I've shared the report with my complaint handler with the Metropolitan Police, and as you can guess, they have not responded to the report. So this is one of the main things that we want to do. But also we want to create more awareness about the grassroots movements that have come about due to this Great Israel Real Estate Event, and talk about how these movements are trying to hold the police more accountable. So, thank you so much for coming to this event. Now, I'm just going to briefly explain the format. Basically, I'm just going to start off with a brief introduction, and then each speaker will have 10 minutes to speak about their relevant themes. So, Kevin over here from Netpol will have the 10 minutes to speak about the report, the findings of the report, and what you can do to help create more awareness about the report and hopefully get a response from the police. Bob George over here, a lovely camp guardian and activist, is part of a movement that is trying to create more accountability from the police and basically get them to respond to a lot of these complaints. So Bob George will be talking about the groups that he is a part of and what they are doing to get police accountability. So then what we'll do is we'll have like a brief conversation between myself and them, and then I'll open up to the floor for a few rounds of Q&As, and then we'll call it to an end. Yeah? Okay, so I hope that explains the format clearly. So I would like to start off with Kevin. Kevin is from Netpol. It is a grassroots police monitoring project. They monitor the role of the state and the police when it comes to grassroots movements, and they have come out with this excellent report, One Day in Edgware. Kevin will explain the findings of the report, how they came about, and what the next plans are. So Kevin, I would like to give it to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me down here today. I just want to start off by pointing out about the name of this report, One Day in Edgware, and the decision on that title was deliberate because we've also produced two other reports. One's called One Day in Manchester, which looks at the policing of anti-fascist demonstrations in a demonstration in central Manchester in April, and we're about next Friday in fact, we're about to launch another report called One Day in Brighton, which is about the policing of the Carnival Against Fascism that took place in Brighton in the end of June, I think it was. And the reason for the choice of name is because it's one day, but it's also a snapshot of what happens all the time. I've been doing this job now for 14 years. I was one of the founders of Netpol before that, all the way back in 2009, and these kind of things keep on happening. It has to be said that in this particular instance, the origins of this report were slightly different. I was in court on the day after the event for waiting to hear that the Court of Appeal had overturned the decision that the Palestine ban was unlawful. I was sat next to somebody who was at the demo, and they started saying, "Oh, did you hear what happened yesterday?" And I said, "Well, I saw the very brief BBC media report," and then she proceeded to tell me what had happened, and I knew instantly that this was something we needed to find a lot more out about. Partly because, as well as doing networks work, I've been an anti-racist campaigner going all the way back to the late 1980s, and what this reminded me of was a fascist demonstration, a far-right demonstration. That deliberate and conscious attempts to try and create a no-go zone for certain people that I remember from town hamlets in the early 1990s, from other parts of London throughout the 1990s. So that was one thing. But the other thing was the description of the response from the Metropolitan Police. Because it was in such marked contrast to the way that, for instance, when Zionists turn up at the big national demonstrations in central London, or the far right turn up in places, they get so heavily protected by the Metropolitan Police or whoever, and certainly that's one of the features of both the other two reports that we've written, and so this is a particular contrast for that. So what we did then is we put out a call out, we asked people to provide their testimonies, and we got a flood of people basically getting in contact with us. And what they told us, and for those of you who were there, you don't really need to, this will not be new news to you, right? But what they told us is essentially what happened is that people turned up with the intention of challenging this property fair that was taking place, and they were ambushed. They were ambushed on the way there, they were attacked during the demonstration, and then they had to be escorted out of the area by the police, which I will come back to. And what those testimonies basically recounted was two things. One, that the Metropolitan Police ignored examples of what were basically race hatred and sexist abuse, and in some cases, in lots of cases, instances of physical assaults. They just turned a blind eye to it. What they also refused to do is to provide any protection to the people that were taking part in that demonstration, which they've got a legal obligation to do. What they also did was, as I said, they escorted people out of the area, which was presented by the opponents of the anti-Zionist demonstration as being a hostile march for a Jewish community. Now you've got to bear in mind that the Met has spent the last 6 months banging on about the importance of countering misinformation, particularly misinformation online, that may stir up further disorder or hatred. And they didn't do anything in relation to that. They allowed that to be able to happen. And so, on top of that, there's a real concern about what this means for the future. We rushed to get this report out as quickly as we could because at the end of June, when we published it, it was also the date in which new police powers to restrict protests outside of places of worship were introduced. They came in they're one of the many changes that are in the latest piece of anti-protest legislation, which is the Policing and Crime Act of 2026. And the Board of Deputies of British Jews immediately jumped on the fact that this piece of legislation was approaching, to put out a press release to say there's no validity to this demonstration, which of course was absolutely not true, and that was proven by the people who managed to get into the fair. But leaving that aside, but also that the police needed to, as soon as they get the powers, they needed to be able to make sure that demonstrations were kept as far away from synagogues as possible. Now, we've been really critical of the introduction of that law, primarily because it's so vague. But what the law actually says now it's in force is that it's an offence to prevent people from taking actions that restrict people from exercising their rights to freedom of worship. Now, an illegal property fair, quite clearly, as I'm sure all of you here know, is not an act of worship, and yet the Board of Deputies immediately were pushing for powers to be used in a way that was basically unlawful. And that's significant because the Metropolitan Police has already demonstrated its extreme willingness to accept many of the pieces of misinformation, outright lies that they get told, particularly by the opponents of the Palestine Solidarity Movement. That Sir Mark Growley, who's the commissioner for the Met in London, has claimed, for instance, that the big national demonstrations deliberately seek to pass by to synagogues, which is clearly not true, and which has been, very vigorously denied by the organisers of those marches. And we always said that, like so much of other anti-protest laws that have been introduced over the last 5-6 years, what they say and how they get used on the streets are two completely different things. And what will happen is, if you get a similar situation to the one that took place, that basically happened on the 14th of June, you will get the Met just basically, you wouldn't even get people getting as close to where they are. They'll just say, if you go anywhere near this particular event, you're going to get arrested, and we're going to arrest you under this power. Now, that doesn't mean that those powers will end up being leading to charges or anybody appearing in court. But by that time, of course, you're right to be able to quite legitimately resist an event that is acting entirely illegally in your own city has been removed. You can't go back and recapture that moment, right? So, and that's a really big fear for us. I mean, that's part of what we want to try and push back against, is to say, look, obviously the events of what happened on that day are now over, but they could easily be repeated. I understand that the organisers of this event have already called another one, right? There will almost certainly be a counter demonstration against it, particularly after what happened last time. And we genuinely have no idea how the police are going to react to that. Which of course means that for you, if you're thinking about going, we really urge you to prepare with information about your rights and make sure you go there assuming that things are going to be possibly as bad as they were, and ideally that a lot more people are there. But hopefully this report will provide for some people a moment of recognition of some of their own experiences, but for most of you maybe an inspiration to go out and push back against this, because unfortunately the police's response to the policing protest is uniformly awful. It's almost always about what's the most convenient for them in the moment, and it's got absolutely nothing to do with human rights in any way. And we have to resist that. We have to stop just accepting that and make sure that we are finding ways to oppose it. And that means every time, unfortunately. So we'll take some questions later on, because I'm sure you've got loads, but thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much. Kevin, when you were talking, I was actually reminded of the fact that these events are still occurring and are still going on, and there's some new ones being planned, these great Israeli real estate events. So we need to campaign against those and be prepared. And as you're talking about the report, I was thinking that the report does capture a lot of our experiences, definitely captures my experience. So definitely people, if you haven't got copies of the report, get copies of the report, and basically, share it and spread it everywhere. Thank you so much. Right, so next up, we have Bob George, our own camp guardian, Bob George speaking. He was, like many of us, there at the actual event. He experienced it, but also he's part of several grassroots movements who are trying to get the police to be more accountable in regards to pro-Palestine demonstrations, especially at the Great Israel Real Estate event. Also, if you don't mind me saying, he's not we're not legal scholars here, so any legal questions, please reserve them for someone who might be more qualified. Bob's going to be talking about these groups and how they are trying to campaign for police accountability. And also, Bob, if you don't mind me saying, it's his first public speaking gig. So give him a round of applause, please. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Mizan. I hope you don't mind. I might just refer to my notes just because it's my safety and it is like my first time. So I'd just like to say It's great to see you all, and I'm very happy and proud to be a member of the camp. And just to say, I'm also a member of PalPulse, who are leading currently on the police complaint response. I'll just say a little bit about what happened, or my experience of that morning. I would say first, actually, that big respect to everybody who attended that protest at the real estate sale. I know a few of you are here today, and I know I've spoken to a few of you. I know Ms. Anne was also there. And on the 14th of June, you all travelled up to Edgware, basically in an attempt to carry out a legal and a moral duty that was actually the sole responsibility and obligation of the state. And in doing so, you were prepared to put yourself in harm's way, and that is what happened. So your bravery and your commitment really deserves recognition. And this is something that we face, and I think we take it for granted in the movement on a weekly, if not daily basis. I'd also say it's pretty clear that as an entirely pacifist group of protesters who were looking to legitimately protest an illegal land selling, effectively a mass fraud, we were not actually prepared or knew what we were actually heading into at that moment. We just weren't prepared. But what we headed into was effectively a premeditated ambush, as Kevin said earlier, by a violent and abusive pro-Israel counter-protest that had been heavily mobilized and had been whipped up into a frenzy by imagery and notions of the new battle for Cable Street. And so you can just imagine 50 to 60 of the most extreme racist white taxi drivers running down a dual carriageway screaming abuse, and then actually being faced by the violence that they would then perpetrate is actually quite a scary scene. So following this, and I won't go into the details of the event, but I'll just talk about what happened that evening in terms of the feelings of the group that I'm in, and what they felt was a necessary response given the, experience of hostility and violence and abuse that we'd received that day. You know, the view was, this has got to end. We are no longer going to be punch bags, and we're not going to put ourselves on the line without a considered legal response, but also to build in some safety nets into how we go about organising ourselves for future protests and actions, because they're going to come thick and fast. And as Kevin mentioned, the new Police and Crime Act has put in severe limitations into what can be done outside of places of worship, in which we are demonised for doing an illegal protest against an illegal event. So that evening, the first thing that we did was to say, one, we need a police response. Two, we need to create a body of evidence. And how do we do that? Well, members of the team straight away said, we are going to put out and create a questionnaire that we can then give out to as many of the people that were there that day, that they could then fill out and give answers to on specific topics as assault, racial abuse, etc., etc. And from this questionnaire, we were then able to establish a series of statistics as best we could, because you've got to remember that we are not a polling group. We are literally just trying to create a body of evidence that we can then very, very quickly give over to the police, to media, because as we know, the news cycle is 24 hours. Within a week, people are not interested, and so it had to happen quickly. And so we were able to give this out to the participants, and we received maybe between 30 to 40, and out of that we were able to establish a series of results. And I'm just going to read you out a few of these. So an overview of the stats that we received was 81% suffered verbal abuse, and this was racist, sexist and anti-Muslim slurs. 50% were attacked before even reaching the protest. 69% feared for their life during the attack. 100% say the attack was politically motivated. 36% sustained injuries ranging from bruises to concussions to even breaks. 5 victims were robbed under the threat of force, and 70% didn't initially report their assault because they believed that the police would not act. Now, this is one of the big issues, is that we kind of, through our experience over the last few years, we talking to the police and actually expecting them to advocate on our behalf even when we are legally reporting is something that we don't engage in anymore because of a level of distrust into how they police us. And so there is a reticence to actually come forward to, tell your story or put in a complaint. But as a result of this, we suffer because if you don't provide a complaint, then you don't provide a statistic. And if you don't provide a statistic, it didn't happen. So right now, the group that we are involved with basically is trying to encourage as many people who were there at Edgware to either report a victim report, which means that you were a victim of assault. You can report violent disorder, which means that if you weren't assaulted, but you were in an area where 3 or more people you feel were threatening your well-being or life, then you can report violent disorder. You can also report as a witness, and you can also report a complaint about the policing. So they're kind of like 4 aspects to this, and you can do all 4. What we are trying to do right now is to encourage people to do so. Not always the easiest thing, but things are happening slowly, and we are creating a body of people that are doing this, and we're hopefully that the more we do, the more that we can actually encourage others to do. And we also ask those that are complaining to encourage others. Like, it's a team effort. We can't do this by ourselves. But I mean, effectively, the first response is to put in as many complaints as possible, because then what we can do is await for the police response to those reports, and then that will then trigger next steps, effectively, how we react to are they taking the report seriously, are they closing cases, are they saying the evidence produced is insufficient, they're saying that as a result of certain circumstances or lack of police work, that we cannot continue your case. So I mean, there are many different ways in which this is going to play out, and we're currently right in the middle of this process, so at the moment it's kind of hard to really talk in too much detail about each individual case. One thing that we have also done, and we have to thank everybody who was there that day, but we have gathered as much evidence in terms of video footage and stills footage, and we've had a team basically kind of working fastidiously round the clock to go through the hours of footage, go through almost frame by frame to identify the assaults. And so what we've done is we put together almost 10 different identification packages of the main offenders who committed the assaults. We were able to show kind of in a storyboard fashion how some of these assaults took place and how they were planned, and we're able in several cases to actually positively ID some of the offenders. So this is all being given and put in front of the police, so now it's over to the police to effectively do their job, because I'd say that we've done it for them in this manner. I would say we in the group that we have, we also have legal advice. We have a solicitor who is giving advice and aiding how we go about putting forward complaints, and we have expertise in other fields. So for those who haven't complained or unsure about it, what I would encourage is you to join, and you can do so by coming and talking to me, and I can give some details about this after the event. And I will pass you back on to Lisanne.
Thank you so much. You said it was your first time public speaking. I don't believe you, bro. All right, that was very good. Thank you so much. Right, so I've got a few questions that I just want to ask myself, just to get a bit of a conversation going. I'd like to start off with Bob. So, Bob, we were both there at the event. We all know, like, when it comes to police and pro-Palestine demonstrations, that the police are generally bad anyway. But did you think it was ever going to be that bad? Literally, I thought it was one of the worst.
Well, when they turned up, you know, and if they did turn up, I mean, for, I'd say, a good 6 minutes, coming off, we arrived at about 11:08, and it was till about 11:14, 11:15 when the first police officer arrived, and I'm talking blue bibs, so these people are literally, you know, they can make you a cup of tea, but outside of that, I'm not sure what else they're experienced in, or what else they can do. I will say one thing, the one officer, the one sergeant who did turn up, I mean, I'm not here to give credit to the police, but I will give credit to this one officer who was faced with kind of batten out. He had his batten out, and that means it's serious, was basically patrolling a line of 30 to 40, you know, pro-Israel counter-protesters who were like basically just like sharks jabbing in and out of what effectively was a kettle at a bus stop. There was like 20 to 30 people deep. We were surrounded. There was nowhere we could go, and this guy's attention was being diverted, but he did his best, and fair play. He was unable to stop actually one of the most severe attacks that we have documented. But as you say, in terms of the policing, it was at best indifferent and consistently negligent. And even worse was the fact that rather than them policing what was a hostile crowd, again, the police were policing the pro-Palestinian protest. Based on the notes that I think it's Adams Lanicki, who was the officer in charge of the day, had clearly written up in his statement that as a result of you know, the many incidences outside, you know, in the last year outside of either synagogues or on the streets of London, that their approach to policing was to protect and to you know, make sure that people inside of the synagogue and around the synagogue weren't facing hostility or any intimidation, which is ironic, seeing as it was their supporters that were basically dishing out, you know, the kicks and the punches on effectively a pacifist crowd. I mean, the only thing I'd say that we did was to block some kicks and punches, but you would do if that's going to basically break a bone. That you had no choice but to. But in terms of the policing, yes, they stopped people receiving aid. When people wanted to leave, they were told they could do so, but unescorted. So what it meant was, I believe is it the Article 10 and 11 of the Human Rights Act, freedom of assembly and the right to be protected when doing so, were you know, completely evaded by their policing on the day. So you know, as a person who did leave, you're a big guy, and when they looked at you, they probably thought, well, I don't want to take him on, but I'm going to give him some intimidation and hostility. And we watched you being followed by a crowd of 20 to 30 people, and that probably lasted 2 to 3 minutes. A number of our comrades, we saw this happen several times. We saw another comrade turn up in a car, and his car was vandalized in front of him, and the police did not engage. So when you talk about the level of policing, it wasn't impartial and it wasn't fair, and at best all they did was provide maybe, you know, a buffer zone to the violence that we experienced for the first 10 to 15 minutes.
Thank you. In fact, you know, in your answer you mentioned that one police officer that was actually trying to police the Zionists. It's not the first time I've heard of this story, and I want to hear more from this legendary police officer. So if you're watching, please get in touch. I want to hear from you.
Sergeant Perkins.
Sergeant Perkins. All right, Sergeant Perkins, please send me a message, all right? Okay, all right. As some of you know, I was there as well, and I was the victim of really, really bad police advice. Basically, as you all saw, like, the Zionists were allowed to block the main road and surround us. And my main thing was, when I wanted to leave the demonstration, my car was parked right behind them. So I told the police officers, like, look, I'm leaving, my car's parked right behind them, you're allowing them to block the road and you're not doing anything. How can I get safely to my car? So they told me to walk right through the Zionists, which is what I did. And I experienced the racism and stuff like that. So I submitted a complaint, and the outcome of the complaint is that I want to find out more information about who the police consulted, who they spoke to in regards to how they policed this demonstration, because it wasn't certainly anyone from the Palestinian side. So I want to know more. And I was told that that is subject to a FOIA request. So I'm going to submit that FOIA request. But I do want to speak to Kevin about this, because you've got experience in obviously Netpol have experience in trying to get information from the police. Trying to get information via FOIA requests, how does that process work, and is it ever fruitful?
I think if you go on the website, What Do They Know, you can look up my name and find a long list of all the FOIA requests.